All good, Tyler?
All good.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today on how to supercharge your content marketing with personalization. My name is Omar Zaydak. I'm the marketing manager here at Visually, a creative talent network and content creation platform, and have the pleasure of being your host and one of your speakers today. I'd also like to introduce Tyler German, product marketing manager at OneSpot, a content personalization platform, who'll be presenting as well. Thanks so much for joining us today, Tyler. We have Thanks, Tyler. We have over 20 years between us on content marketing and personalization, and are going to be sharing key learnings, insights, and best practices when it comes to content and personalization. Now, before we get started, I'd like to review some ways you can engage with us during the broadcast. And the first is the Ask a Question button. If there's anything you'd like to ask us today, please click on the Ask a Question button and type your question in. We've left time at the end of the broadcast to answer any questions that you may have, and we'll get to as many as we can. Secondly, today's webinar will be available on demand. After we're done, we'll be providing you all with a link sent via email. So with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get started. And first, let's take a look at today's agenda. So Tyler is going to start by sharing key personalization trends in 2017 and beyond to set the stage. I'll then walk you through a proven framework for producing successful content. This includes identifying your audience and goals, the buying journey, and how to map content to various channels, such as social media and your website. Tyler will then walk you through personalization best practices and winning examples. And finally, I'll discuss how to create, and more importantly, scale the content production required to power a personalization strategy. So now I'm going to turn it over to Tyler, who's going to talk about the key personalization trends we're seeing. Tyler, it's all yours.
Great, thank you, Omar. And I think this is a stat you probably saw when you first registered for the webinar, and I think it's important to start with this because if marketers are, especially marketing executives, are concerned with personalization, and 94% of them say it's critical to reach their customers, ultimately, what are they doing about it to get there? And so on the next slide, another way we like to start talking about this platform, or this idea of personalization, is think about the world that your customers and your prospects are living in today. Everywhere they go, they expect a one-to-one, personally relevant experience that is unique to them in the digital world. So for example, Amazon has recommended products based on your purchase and browsing history that is a significant source for their revenue. Netflix recommends particular shows in your past viewing history and ratings. And Facebook even uses your engagement on and off of the platform to determine what you'd most like to see and engage with in your newsfeed. And so the short answer is marketing executives believe personalization is critical because these platforms at the same time are competing with the same attention that your consumers have. And so there's an element of attention scarcity there. And especially with this element of attention scarcity in the next slide, branded content marketing is not exempt from this, what we call a personalization imperative. And so it's very important that brands recognize the opportunity and the pitfalls in choosing to embark on a content personalization strategy or not doing so. So some of the pitfalls involve how does your consumer actually feel when they're shown content that may or may not be relevant to them. And this stat in particular is really striking to me, and I think it would be for anybody in the audience, that not only are you not getting engagement from consumers if you give them content that's not relevant to them, but you're potentially making them frustrated if you're giving them content that's not relevant to their interests. But on the flip side, when consumers get content that's relevant to them, on the next slide, it actually increases their purchase intent. The majority of them say that they're more likely to purchase products on brands that are providing value to them through personally relevant content marketing. And so with these two things together, I think it makes a pretty strong case for why marketers need to take personalization seriously for content marketing. And with this, I'd like to flip it back over to Omar to talk about building the framework.
Oh, thanks a lot, Tyler. And those were really interesting statistics on personalization. So let's talk about content for a bit. So we all know content takes a lot of time, effort, and thought to get right. And not all content is created equal. So the question is, how do you really get the most value out of all your efforts? There's a framework and system I'd like to introduce you to that makes content deliberate, structured, and as a result gives you a greater chance of succeeding with the content. So this is a 4-step content marketing framework I'm going to be talking about. And it starts with your audience. So who are you selling to and what are you selling? Secondly, it's all about your goals. What are you really trying to get out of the content? What are your objectives? What are you trying to achieve? It could be leads, it could be views, it could be conversions, depending on the stage of the funnel your prospects are in, or the type of content asset it is. Third up is identifying the customer journey your prospects are going through. And we'll be talking more about this in detail, but we all know how much more complex it's gotten, especially in the B2B space over the years. And finally, how do you map channels and content to your customer journey and audience? So let's go through each one of these steps. So step 1 is just knowing your target audience and who they are. This is really user personas 101. What do they look like? What problems do they have? Where do they go? What are their interests and aspirations? And where can you add value? Where you can add value really depends on the persona and stage in the customer journey you're talking about and that your audience is in. Taking the time to document personas, demographics, and psychographics on paper really crystallizes everything, something we highly recommend you do, something we do here, and it helps you become consistent in your content, especially if you have multiple people on your content team. And that could be internal people or could even be outsourced. So let's talk about the next step here, which is defining your goal. So in terms of defining your content goals, you really need to start by setting the KPIs. And the KPIs may vary from organization to organization, but could include views, engagement, conversions into leads, opportunities, all the way down to closing the deal. Your primary qualitative goals should always be around adding value and deepening your relationship with the prospect or customer. Everything else follows after that. If you do a good job on adding value that's relevant to your audience and meets their emotional needs, you're going to attract more views that ultimately translate into leads and opportunities down the line. So let's take a look at mapping the customer journey. And this is arguably the most important and one of the most difficult steps to get right. Over 67% of the customer journey is now done online before even talking to a salesperson. And as I mentioned before, it's certainly gotten more complex over the years in terms of the sheer content and touch points required. But you could generally simplify it into 6 steps, which are the trigger, which is awareness, consideration, evaluation, purchase, adoption, and advocacy. So this is really a simple high-level framework that fits most organizations, but you really need to think about your own customer journey and customize this for your specific products and customer base. The type of content that's most valuable is going to depend on where your customers are in the funnel. So early on in the awareness stage, things like blog posts, ebooks, social media posts, and infographics tend to work well. When they've moved on to the consideration and purchase stages, that's where things like customer success stories, white papers, product demos, and free trials are more relevant. Finally, once you've already landed that customer and are trying to retain and grow them, channels like product and customer videos, as well as live events that give you a face-to-face opportunity with them, roundtables, and certain types of webinars tend to work well, as long as they're 100% focused on the customer. Moving on to the final step, and arguably the most important, is really aligning channels and content with the journey. So you'll have one of these matrices that you see on the screen right now for each persona or customer segment. What you want to do here is fill as many boxes as you can that are relevant to both you and the customer. You're probably not going to want to fill in or even be able to fill in every box, but what you want to do is really prioritize the most important channels, stages, and content that maps into each. This should turn into a content calendar once you've gone through this exercise that ensures you're nurturing your prospects along the entire buying cycle and lays out what you're going to do and when. Of course, this framework is for the content planning stages. Content creation and execution is another story that we'll get into later in the webinar. So I'd now like to talk a bit about scaling content production. We all know that content is time and resource intensive, and it takes a lot of it to properly map to an entire customer journey. When you add personalization into the mix, this means even more content is required. So how do you create the massive scale you need to make your strategy a success? So here's a proven framework I've used and many content marketers use to create content at scale. So step one, in terms of goals, what you want to think about is, what's the end goal or ideal outcome or success look like? As an example, it might be the amount of content you produce for each step in the journey. Identify how much you want to produce and when. You could take this further by setting further goals like views, reach, engagement, and potentially conversions into leads and customers. I mean, in the end, it's really up to you, but you need to lay this out upfront to guide your strategy and increase your chances for success. The second step is processes. You're going to want to identify what the ideal process is for you to hit that goal. And it really starts with brainstorming. That's really going into what pain points your customers have, what's important at each stage of the journey, what are you an expert in, and what topics are relevant. There's really no bad ideas at this point. You want to get them all out there and end up choosing the best ones to move forward with. The other pieces in the process is assessing how big the opportunity is, defining your content calendar and roadmap, actually developing your content, which we'll get into after Tyler talks some more about personalization after this slide, distribution through various channels, measuring KPIs, and finally adjusting your strategy on an ongoing basis, basically looking at what worked, what didn't, and optimizing it from there. So we got two more steps. The third one comes down to technology. And it's really important when it comes to thinking about how you're going to scale an operation. Regardless of what technology you end up using, you have to define your process first and then choose the right technology to execute that workflow, as opposed to what some people do is, buying technology first and then trying to fit it to meet their needs, which isn't optimal. There's all sorts of planning and content creation technologies out there, so you're going to want to choose something suitable for your specific team, resources, and objectives. And this brings us to the final step of the framework, which is people and resources. Ask yourself, given your goals, process, and strategy, and technology, what people and resources do I need to succeed? Again, you want to first identify the ideal process and outcomes, and then evaluate how to align your people and resources. Lots of content operations make the mistake of doing the best they can with the people and resources they have, when in reality, they should start with the goals they want to achieve and then build the people and resources required to execute on those goals. That's not always realistic or feasible, but definitely is going to increase your success rate if you could drive that initiative forward. So I have one more slide here before passing it off to Tyler. And this is really looking at, going either internal or external for your content creation needs. It's really rare for any company to have all the talent, resources, and subject matter expertise they need to produce all their content in-house. And there's a few different options to creating the content you need to power your customer journeys. So first up is agencies, which is the route larger companies have typically gone. The pros are they have a great strategic view, really know what's going on in the market, and can do end-to-end. So everything from ideation to creation to distribution. The problem with them is they tend to be big, slow, and expensive. Freelancers are another option, which is cost-effective and efficient, but comes with a lot of management overhead that many marketers don't have the time or will to manage, an entire freelance workforce themselves. Finally, there's these hybrid models that try to find the sweet spot between the agency and the freelance models. These have the high-touch feel of an agency, but the economics and speed and efficiency of a freelancer. So you have to be a bit more hands-on than with an agency, but less hands-on than if you're managing the freelancers yourself. So I hope that these frameworks gave you a good overview of the options you have for producing content into personalization that power your customer journeys. And now I'm going to pass it back over to Tyler, who's going to talk about the key things to keep in mind for your personalization strategy, along with best practices and some winning examples of personalization. So Tyler, back over to you.
Thank you. And so I'd love to start off by talking about this slide in particular, because when talking about scaling content marketing, content strategy, and production, it's important to keep track of what data you're collecting, and then not just the data, but also what questions are you trying to answer with your content marketing, and making sure you're driving towards ROI and creating the ability to actually deliver personalized experiences with the data you're pulling in. And so take a look at these 3 bullets right here. And the important questions to answer are with your data are what each person has done. And so think about this. When somebody's on your website, when they're actually moving through your website and clicking on different call to actions or consuming different articles that are about various topics, what are they actually doing while they're there? And do you have data to track what that looks like over time? The next point is, what is each person interested in? And so taking it up a level and looking at the topics of the content they're consuming or the reasons they're there. Are they trying to accomplish a goal like buying something? Are they researching for a project that they're about to take on? Why are they there? What are they interested in? And the third bullet is, what are people like them doing? And so it's important to also have data that is in kind of a lookalike model fashion to show, okay, well, there are these people who are on our website who are doing different things on a goal basis or an education basis. They're interested in these particular topics. And so what about the other set of data? What are other people like them doing? And so when you have the ability to answer those 3 different questions with your data, you now have the ability to leverage technology to predict what individuals are most likely to be interested in real time across channels, and essentially be able to deliver that personalized marketing experience. And so key to this whole process is this concept of content sequencing. And so at OneSpot in particular, we believe that between a brand and a customer, there's a unique and optimal sequence of content to display to somebody over time that maximizes their potential for engagement and also action. And so as you answer those data questions from earlier, these content sequences that map to an individual user become more possible. And so on the next slide, I'd like to dive into a little bit of an example of what that really looks like and bring it to life for you. For example, we work with a client called Delta Faucet, and many of you are familiar with them from home fixtures you might have. But in essence, what their content strategy is about inspiring the consumer to take on a home improvement project or to simply install a new shower head just to bring new life to their current living environment. And they use content marketing and personalization to create those moments of inspiration with their consumers. And so on the next slide, I'd love to show you what this really looks like in action and in a real live digital environment for a brand. And so starting on the left, if you look at the image that says on-site, you'll notice that Delta Faucet is actually personalizing content on the page itself. And that can be a combination of personalizing content on landing pages, on article pages like you see here where they have a right rail that says recommended for you or people also like. And what's happening there is users are getting content that's related to their browsing history and related to the content that they're on, so they're more likely to engage with something that they're interested in. And so when you take that idea, you also apply it to email, what you get is what we call our product OneSpot Inbox, where Delta Faucet is sending individually personalized emails that have content injected into the email at the time that the email marketer presses send. And so not only are you reaching them with relevant content on the site, you're also connecting with them in their inbox where they've already subscribed to your newsletter, they already read it, and you're delivering more value to them over time through that as well. With the other bullet on the right, in-ad and react, those are our paid media products for both acquisition and retargeting. And as with on-site and inbox, if you're thinking about content marketing, it doesn't just happen over one article consumption, it happens over time with multiple pieces of content consumed. And a great way to do that is to retarget users with individually relevant content. And remember that content sequencing concept we talked about earlier, you can use that as a vehicle to deliver sequential content that's relevant for that individual. And in-ad for acquisition, we typically look at, remember that point of data we talked about earlier where you take a look at the people who are like the people you already have data on. You're able to pull in and attract new visitors that are like your current highly engaged readers. And to tie it all together, you should have a dashboard solution that tells you what content is resonating with your audience on a topical basis, as well as guide your editorial team to, or your freelancers in platforms to create the right content that maximizes engagement. And so to dive a little bit deeper, I want to show how these results actually come to life and how to actually derive value from personalization, because at the end of the day, it doesn't mean anything if it doesn't track to return on investment or to any kind of revenue. And so important to note with on-site personalization is that Delta Faucet is looking at a couple key metrics to determine content personalization's effectiveness. The first metric they look at is how many articles per session is a visitor reading. And so there are big differences we've seen between somebody who only reads one piece of content in their visit or somebody who reads 3 pieces of content in their visit. And the person who reads 3 pieces of content tends to be highly engaged. And when personalization is in play, they're 4 times more likely to read 3 pieces of content than a visitor who is not seeing personalized content. And so that's one area of impact that we see. And as a result of that, people who read 3 pieces of content, they are 4 times more likely to click high-value call to actions like where to buy or buy now or sign up for an email newsletter. And so there you have a very clear story of content marketing's value being proven from not only a content consumption standpoint, but also the so what. Why are they actually consuming content and what is that actually doing for my business? They're clicking more on high-value call to actions. They're doing more things that I want them to do. And so for in-ad, I mentioned this earlier, this is our approach for bringing in net new visitors that are just like your highly engaged visitors. And the important things to keep in mind here is when you're actually targeting somebody to bring them into your site experience, you don't just want them to click through, especially if it's involving content. You want them to click through and engage with your marketing. And so 2 important metrics to look at here are the 40-second page view rate and the article scroll rate. And so after somebody's clicked on an ad from CNN.com or wherever they might be browsing and they've clicked through to your piece of content, are they spending enough time on the page to actually read and understand your piece of content? Are they scrolling down far enough so that you can reasonably say that they're actually making it through your article? And then what happens after that? And so that's the multi-page view rate on articles. And so these are some results that Delta Faucet has seen from not only people coming to the website from another place like CNN.com or like a MSN.com, but also they're more likely to go and click on other pages and find value elsewhere in the site, either on product pages or on content pages. And finally, to round it out, I mentioned the retargeting strategy earlier. Just a quick note on that. If all these other things are true, then it naturally follows that people who are retargeted with personally relevant content are more likely to engage with that content than people who are not retargeted at all. And so these 2 metrics right here, people who have been retargeted with personalized content versus a habitual site visitor and versus the average site visitor that is not habitual. And the results seem to speak for themselves that if you invest in retargeting with personalized, individually relevant content, you see pretty good results. And so I'd like to flip that back over to Omar so he can talk about examples of what Visually does.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks a lot for that, Tyler. That was a really cool overview of all the personalization technologies. Pretty eye-opening to see how far this space has come, and really the impact that personalization can have on engagement and conversion. So that's a great overview. I'd like to talk a little bit about Visually. So if you recall from one of my earlier slides, we talked about the various models of content creation. There's an agency model, there's a freelance model, and there's this hybrid model. So Visually is an example of this hybrid model that's trying to balance, the best of both worlds in creating content. So Visually was founded in 2009 to help organizations like yourselves and content marketers create content, engaging content for your customer journeys. So this is really like an end-to-end network of freelancers, and the kind of content that could be produced includes custom photos, videos, ebooks, infographics, white papers, blog posts, really the full gambit of content that you'd want to use in your marketing initiatives. So it's a platform that connects you with the highest quality talent from a network of over 1,200 creative freelancers. So we've gone ahead and handpicked the best freelancers in each category that we then match you up with on your specific project. You also get an account director that manages the actual creative freelancers and the project for you, all the way from the creative brief and strategy to completion. So you could think of it as an extension of your creative and content team. And all of this is tied through with a platform that lets you manage the entire process, gain visibility into project status, and chat in real time with your assigned team. So the Visually platform and networks produced over 6,000 content projects of all shapes, sizes, and colors for thousands of clients, including 40 of the Fortune 100. And they trust our platform and network of specialized creatives to help build content really for any format and industry. And I'd just like to take you through I have one slide prepared for you. We have many more examples, but just kind of wanted to show you some of the customer breadth and what we've done with them. So infographics, great way to get a big piece of content. Let's say it's a white paper or a topic with a lot of points. Great way to have that in a condensed format, and that's easily digestible by your audience. And these are a great way to they're really popular, so it's a great thing to put on your blog posts or social media posts as a way to get people in, and once again consume data quicker, because as humans we're very much visual people, and so this is a great form of content. Videos, videos such as the one that Autodesk has are also a great way. There's various kinds of videos you could do. You could do explainer videos, for your company. You could do product videos. As we've seen, video as a marketing tactic keeps growing year over year and keeps growing in terms of engagement. So it's become really part of a lot of organization strategies, whether you're a small person shop, let's say you're a founder and just want to start video on your business, all the way to massive enterprises that have videos for various projects, divisions, and industries. Another key piece in a content strategy is social content, and Cisco is an example that's leveraged the network to produce social content. So these are what are the graphics that you want to put out? It could potentially be a product release. It could be promoting an ebook or white paper. It could even be promoting an event. But ultimately, all these social, your social stream, the more visuals are in the social stream, the higher engagement you're going to get. And that's something that should be part of everyone's strategy. And one final example is ebooks. Especially when it comes to B2B, this is one of the core tactics. Something that Salesforce, I used to work in Salesforce on their candidate team in demand generation, and ebooks were a staple of our top of funnel tactics to kind of educate and draw people in and start pushing them down that funnel. But ebooks contain, you got to get the copywriting right, you got to get the graphics right, the imagery, how long it is, and make it very readable. Not always easy. Having tried to do this myself before, to get a good ebook takes a lot of effort. That being said, when you get it right, it could pay dividends for years beyond. There's many examples of people coming up with an anchor ebook, which is kind of like the core foundation of their entire content marketing strategy, and just driving leads and engagement on that for years to come. So as we mentioned before, thanks again, Tyler. That was a great overview. As we mentioned before, we've left some time for questions for the audience. I'd like to remind you that if you do have a question you haven't submitted yet, please use the Ask a Question button, and we'll get to as many as we can right now. So just looking through the questions here, Tyler, we're going to give this first one to you. And the question is, who are the stakeholders involved in implementing personalization, and how do you get their buy-in?
That's a great question, because if you're thinking about personalization from the outset, it's a very similar crowd from the same people that are working with you on content marketing. So if you're talking about content marketing personalization specifically, that can involve anyone from the content marketing manager, the digital marketing manager, all the way up to the head of marketing at the VP or CMO level. But one thing that people tend to forget is people tend not to include until the very last seconds people like finance or IT resources that also are there to help be your backstop and keep you safe in security questions and tech stack overlap and budgetary and ROI conversations. And so the important things I would say to sum up are the marketing and content lead and some friends in finance and IT. Those are the most important people to get their buy-in for.
Thanks for that, Tyler. And I'll take this next question. And this next question is about, when would you promote content on your own channels rather than buy sponsored content? Which is another great question. So let's just clarify what's meant here by sponsored content, so we're all on the same page. So sponsored content is when you pay to put content that you own, let's say a white paper, an ebook, on a property you don't own. So this could be like something like the Huffington Post or Adweek, for example. So why would you promote on someone else's site versus your site? And to answer that, I don't think it's a matter of one or the other. I think both are really important elements of a content marketing promotion mix. And it also comes down to targeting the audience you want to reach. So you might be creating great content and promoting it on all your channels, like your email and your blog, but chances are there's still a lot of people in your targeted audience that you can't reach using your own channels. There's simply too many people on different channels. And that's where something like sponsored content comes in, which is a great way to expand the reach of your content to your target audience. So you could take your latest white paper as an example and syndicate it on a third-party website to expand its reach, or take that latest great blog post you wrote up and promote it on a site like CMO.com or Adweek if you're targeting brands and marketers, giving you an audience that you may not have been able to reach on your own. So to put it simply, it's really not one or the other, but rather what the right mix of each is in your strategy. And once again, that really depends on your overall goals, how good your own content does on your own channels, and of course, your budget and resources. So thanks again for that question. Tyler, this next one's for you. Internally, we are challenged with proving the ROI of our content marketing initiatives. Haven't we all heard that before? How do you translate these metrics into proven ROI?
Another very important question to ask. So if you're talking about content marketing ROI, obviously the first thing to think about is your key business goal that your content is mapping towards. And so for a lot of our customers, and I talked a little bit about Delta Faucets, in particular, it's important to businesses in general to drive sales, but also it's important for marketing departments to be able to affect their brand in a positive way. And so some goals that we see across our clients are increasing the amount of action taken by consumers who consume a lot of content. And so we talked about Delta Faucet's number of 4 times the increase of people who consume 3 pieces of content, and then those same users are then 4 times more likely to click call to action buttons like where to buy and buy it now, things like that. And so that's kind of a lower level attribution way to think about what are the things that I can track that are mapping towards these things. And also you can also commission brand studies to show the impact of content marketing consumption on the actual attitudes that a consumer can have towards a brand. And so those are the key things that we tend to hear from our clients on how they're planning to track ROI from working with us for content marketing personalization.
Well, thanks for answering that question, Tyler.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we have time for one more question. We always try to keep our webinars short and sweet. We'll go ahead and answer this question. That being said, we'll follow up with the questions that haven't been answered. So this is another great question, and one that I think is on everyone's minds, and that's how much content should we be creating? So really, like, what's the optimum mix of content? How much do you need in different varieties? And ultimately, that's going to depend on how complex your customer journey is and how complex the product that you're selling is. In short, though, the answer, I would say, is as much as you can without compromising quality, and ensuring that everything gets promoted effectively. I'd say as long as the content is high quality and that you can promote it to your right channels, there's almost really not too much. People are just voracious consumers of content. We all like to scan things really quickly right now. We're used to getting hit up with a lot of pieces. So sometimes it takes a lot to get the one that resonates with the person. Customers are hungry for content. We all know this. It doesn't matter if it's in the awareness, consideration, purchase, or retention stages. So having content, you're going to want to have content that really covers all the topics, questions, and pain points that they have. If you could do this, you're going to have a higher chance of getting them down that funnel and getting them down that purchase funnel quicker. It's also important to have content in different formats because everyone really has a preference, right, on how they'd like to consume content. You know, some people might, prefer videos, infographics, or blog posts, as opposed to other channels. So one thing I like to do is repurposing one piece of content, let's say a single webinar like this one, into multiple formats, and that makes sure that you're getting the most out of your content investment. So just to give you guys an example with this webinar, webinars take a lot of time and effort to produce, but they have a lot of rich content in it. So, our goals with this webinar is to turn it into a blog post, turn it into a white paper, and also potentially turn it into an infographic, just so we're leveraging, the effort of thinking about content, pushing it out to all those channels and in different formats, so we can make sure that this goes, basically gets the most mileage that we can out of it. So that's all the time we had for questions. I'd like to thank everyone for attending the webinar today. Tyler, I'd like to thank you for joining. That was really insightful into the personalization space. As we mentioned, today's webinar will be available for on-demand viewing, and that's going to be via a link we're going to send you after this webinar to your email. And we invite you to share it with anyone else in your organization who'd find it relevant. If you'd like to learn more about what we discussed today, please reach out to us at the email addresses you see on your screen. So if you're interested in content creation, the hybrid model, want to understand what that's all about, and some of the customer successes we've had, feel free to reach out to Visually. And likewise, if you're looking to get into personalization, some hot technology that's having proven really good ROI for customers in that space, we all know the impact that personalization can have just from being consumers ourselves. Feel free to reach out to OneSpot. So thanks again, everyone, for your time. We hope this webinar was valuable, and have a great rest of your day or afternoon.